So renewed questions have been raised about the state of our country's roads following the crash that claimed 21 lives on the N2 near Pongola. That's in KwaZulu-Natal. Transport Minister Fikile Mbalula previously admitted that 80% of the national road network is past its 20-year design life. Driver behaviour also contributing factor to the carnage that we've seen on our roads for years now. Let's make sense of this now, get you more perspective, bring in Dr. Joash Mageto, who's with the University of Johannesburg's Transport and Supply Chain Department. The doc joins us via our video link. Also joining this discussion, I beg your pardon, is Gavin, CEO of the Road Freight Association. To both our guests, good morning to you. Thanks very much indeed for your time. It's lovely to have you on the program. Dr. Mageto, perhaps I can begin with you. I mean, you know, what we've seen take place on the N2 on Friday is clearly as a result of what many people will say is, quite frankly, human negligence. It was the truck driver overtaking another truck that caused this head-on collision. But from the line of work that you've been able to do you reckon that there are issues of general safety when it comes to the country's roads?
Yeah, good morning, and thank you very much for having me in the show this morning. Maybe first of all, I would like to convey my heartfelt condolences to the bereaved families and also to the affected school students, teachers, and also the entire Pongola community. Now, coming back to the question, what we can say is that the issue of safety is generally the responsibility of every road user, and more so to the motorists. They have the highest responsibility. And the roads can be good from an engineering perspective, but if human behavior does not move towards safety or observance, then the engineering of the roads, however good they are, it's not going to work. So from my point of view, is that many of the accidents, especially on our African roads, are due to human negligence. And they point towards human error as being one of the major causes of road crashes on African roads.
Yeah. Gavin, I mean, is that also your experience? I mean, does it corroborate with what you're seeing coming out of the industry itself, that in many instances, when there are accidents, especially of this kind of magnitude, it's usually down to decisions that are made by warm bodies who are driving these vehicles?
Yeah, what we expect generally is that the operators themselves, they need to make a huge compromise towards safety as much as they are seeking for profits. Because remember, what happens is that many of our drivers, they could be chasing the economic side, but then they forget the safety side. So from my view is that there should be a coordinated kind of approach towards safety in the country. And this coordination doesn't stop maybe with only the law enforcement officers or the law enforcement agencies, but rather a more coordination to include the drivers through education, through awareness, and also to make sure that the operators, especially of heavy vehicles, they're also involved into how road safety can be achieved in the country.
Yeah.
So it's more of a system-wide approach to safety from my perspective.
Sure. Gavin Kelly, let's bring you into the discussion if you are able to hear us. I wonder whether you could speak to that. You know, what's been mentioned by Dr. Mageto there about there being external factors within the industry that may force drivers to make the kind of decisions that led to the carnage we saw on Friday. This obviously doesn't excuse the behavior, but it does move us a step forward towards understanding why somebody would do that, given how risky the behavior itself is. Gavin Kelly, are you able to hear us?
I can hear you now.
There you are. I'm not sure if you're able to catch my question. Essentially, I'm asking whether, from your vantage point, you're able to give us more insights around the pressures that drivers typically face when they transport cargo around the country that would force these drivers to taking the kind of risks that this particular truck driver took on Friday that led to this carnage obviously doesn't excuse the behavior itself, but certainly helps us understand why somebody would do something like that.
Well, we don't know what was in the mind of that driver. And this is the second time that we've seen some really, really bad behavior. You will recall there was an incident, I think about a month and a half ago, where a couple of motorists videoed a driver driving a truck at high speeds along a road that wasn't made for overtaking, let alone high speed. So the first question is, what's actually going through the driver's mind? What's happening? The rules in terms of driving a heavy motor vehicle in South Africa, whether it's a freight vehicle or a bus, are quite strict in terms of what is required of both the driver and of the driver's employer, fleet operator, the company, whatever you'd like to call it. So that's the first question that has to be raised. Drivers are made very, very aware of what is required of them in terms of meeting the laws of the road. So there has to be a conscious decision, either a conscious decision to break that, or then there must have been some medical or physical thing that happened. They did. So that's of concern. It seems to be happening a lot more. Maybe that's just because today there are a lot more cameras out there that can capture this sort of thing. What happened 2 days ago is unacceptable. I mean, I can only imagine what those families are going through, and the industry can only give their condolences. But the important thing is we have to find out in the first place why this happened, and secondly, how we're going to stop this happening, because the legislation is there. It's just that it seems that people are not adhering to the legislation.
And I guess the follow-up question is, why would they do that? I mean, the risks are obvious, right? We do know how this could possibly end, and sadly that tragic end came to fruition on Friday. Those who are studying the industry say there's pressure placed on drivers to meet particular deadlines.
Well, that's always a good excuse to put up front, and there are going to be companies who are going to push their drivers to do things they shouldn't be doing. So if we start from what you are required to do in terms of driving a vehicle like that, driving hours are very, very clear. Maximum speeds are very, very clear. In terms of the cargo you carry and the routes you drive, there could be extra or more stringent requirements. So there are going to be two scenarios here. The one is going to be the driver took that decision on his or her own bat totally. And the other is that the operator or the company or the fleet is not compliant, is not prepared to listen to and abide by the various bits of legislation and rules that are there, and are pushing their drivers to do that. And we need to be able to ascertain what it is and then deal with it. And if it's the companies doing it, then we need to be able to deal with those companies.
All right, and I guess we'll speak about how that happens. But Dr. Mageto, let's bring you back into the discussion. I mean, this moment has brought into sharp focus, the kind of concerns that have been raised by ordinary citizens in some instances, heading to social media, appealing to the minister to do something because that stretch of road happens to be quite notorious. The Minister of Transport has previously admitted that, some of the country's national road network is past its 20-year design life. It sounds quite technical for people who don't really do this for a living. So help us understand what that means and what the implications are, possibly, the risks perhaps.
Yeah, generally, as I alluded before, road safety practice, actually the one best road safety practice is around 4 pillars. That is engineering, education, evaluation, and also law enforcement. Now, when the engineering is not right, there is a possibility that crashes can happen, or there's a likely that there's a high risk for crashes to happen, especially if you talk of potholes, maybe no proper signage and all such kind of things. And some points you'll get that maybe at a point where the road was passing before, there was no human settlement, but now there is human settlement in that area. Maybe there is a huge crossings on the roads, and it requires the engineering of the roads to change at that particular point. Those are actually legit concerns that the communities are having, and the government should come in to at least make sure that the design that it is on our roads right now makes sense to the human settlement around the regions where the roads are passing. But also, another important aspect is how do we change human behavior around road safety? And that is a big issue. As the CEO of the Road Freight Association has said, we don't know what's going through in the mind of the driver. But one thing that we can know or we can guess is that many of the truck drivers could be, due to the pressure, they could be maybe using drugs. Some could be distracted. There is also an element of maybe fatigue that is involved. There is also an element of maybe alcohol use during driving. And how can the operators help the law enforcement officers to be able to identify these problems from their organization, and so that they bring it forward, so that the law enforcement is not only left to the government agencies, but it also goes all the way to the operator's gate, so that they can be able to know, is our driver fit for purpose in terms of driving on public roads.
Absolutely. On that note, Gavin, what questions do you reckon we should be asking of the operator? I think the questions for the driver will be obvious, and I imagine some of those will be posed to him when he appears in court today. But I guess there's kind of some probing that needs to happen for the operator too.
Yeah, it's a very difficult one. As I said just now, you have two types of operators in the country, and unfortunately, this isn't only freight operators, it's citizens, it's the average human nature. So you either have those who are going to abide by the law and who are going to ensure that their employees abide by the law, and that whatever they do in terms of managing their employees then meets the requirements of the law. So, for example, a very simple example. You're not allowed to drive a vehicle on a public road if you're under the influence of any sort of intoxicating substance, whether it's alcohol or drugs or anything else. Now, one of the duties of an operator, so a transport company owner, is to ensure that before their employees take their vehicles onto the road, that they are not under influence. How does that done? Well, you screen, obviously. And there are some operators who screen every time their vehicle enters a depot or a place where they need to load or offload, and when they leave. So you get those who really, really abide by the law. Then you get those who don't care, and that's the reality, is they don't care, they're there to make a buck, they're not worried about the regulations. So the question is, how do we assist law enforcement? Because the police can't be everywhere all the time. One gets that. How do we assist them to ensure that the operators or those who drive vehicles like that are abiding by the rules? That's the question. So there's going to be some sort of partnerships. Where you load and offload, we need to ensure that those companies say, I'd like to see your intoxicating substance, your alcohol screen report, or you've got to say to me or prove to me that was done. On-the-road checks, for example, need to be done, and operators need to do that. It doesn't need to be necessarily law enforcement. Law enforcement's right at the end of the scale. But it's going to be a case of bringing in place or into action. This is what we said to the minister, is when you license operators to work on the road, freight operators, or anybody who runs a fleet, have you gone through a check? What sort of check do you have? Have you made sure they abide by certain screenings, and use associations like the RFA to help you bring that into play? Because we cannot continue like this.
Yeah, absolutely, especially because what we saw take place on Friday could have been avoided. Thanks very much indeed for both your take. Really do appreciate it. Gavin Kelly is the CEO of the Road Freight Association. Also joining us there is Dr. Joash Mageto, who's with the University of Johannesburg Transport and Supply Chain Department. To both of you, once again, thanks very much indeed for weighing in.